Good. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar today on simpler recycling. But thanks so much for spending your time, and big thanks to the ReLondon team, Liz, Shelley, who have agreed to share their learnings and experience and knowledge with us for the benefit of landlords everywhere, all over the UK, not just London. So I'm going to straight over to Liz and Shelley. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. Good morning, everyone. My name's Liz Horsfield. I'm a strategic advisor in the local authority support team at ReLondon. I'm joined by my colleague Shelley Holmes, who is an advisor in the same team. It's great to see so many people joining today to find out about simpler recycling legislation and what it means for you. So today we're going to talk through the legislation and what it means for you today. We've got a slide deck to talk through, but we've also got time for you to ask questions and discuss at the end. So to explain a little bit about who we are, ReLondon, we are a statutory body. We're a partnership of the Mayor of London and London's 33 boroughs. And our purpose is to improve waste and resource management in London and accelerate our transition to a low carbon circular city. And we do that in a number of ways. We work with local authorities to help them rethink plans and policies to support recycling improvements. And we provide research and evidence for improving services and building circular communities. We support small and medium enterprises in London to adopt or to scale circular business models, reshaping high streets to become circular hubs. And we engage with Londoners through campaigns such as Love Not Landfill to reduce young people's reliance on fast fashion, and London Recycles to inform residents about how to cut their waste and recycle more. So today we've got two parts to the presentation. First of all, I'm going to talk you through the detail of the simpler recycling legislation and what it might mean for you and your properties. And Shelley is going to talk through the support available from local authorities and from us to help make these changes work well. Just a quick note on scope and housekeeping. I know we've got a lot of people here from all over the country. We're not going to be able to discuss kind of individual collection issues as part of today. And I should have said also that ReLondon, we are very London focused, but we do also work with local authorities across the country, particularly on flats recycling improvements. So hopefully there will be lots relevant to all of you today. So why we've invited you here, or why we've been invited to speak to you today. We talked to lots of local authorities and residents about simpler recycling, but today we really wanted to engage with managing agents, landlords, social housing organisations, because the housing management sector has a really vital role to play in improving recycling rates in England. So the waste and recycling sector is undergoing significant changes. So from April 2026, all households are legally required to have a full recycling service, including food waste. Local authorities are preparing to roll out new services, and they often need support and collaboration from managing agents and social housing landlords to do that successfully. Did someone go off speaker? Mute yourself, please. Sorry, bit background. Thank you. So we know that across England, there are about 4 million households living in purpose-built flats. About 1.4 million of these are in London, but there are lots outside London as well. And we know that many of these flats currently don't have access to comprehensive recycling services, or have recycling services that are more difficult to use. We know that recycling is more difficult for people sharing bins, but we also know that residents really do want to recycle, and now by law they are entitled to the same service as houses. So making it easier for people who live in flats to recycle well benefits everybody, benefits the residents, it benefits managing agents, local authorities, and crucially the environment. As I mentioned, there are several new pieces of legislation that have either come into force or are about to over the next few years. And this is just to put simpler recycling into context. It's one element of a suite of reforms that together aim to reduce and decarbonise waste and increase reuse and recycling. Shelley is going to briefly touch on the others a bit later in the presentation on how they impact you. But together, all of these bits of legislation mean that the way that products are packaged, how recycling is collected, the cost of disposing of rubbish and where that's going to fall is all going to change. And these new pieces of legislation represent the most significant changes to the waste industry for quite a long time. And the impacts will reach beyond those who deal directly with the waste, those who create the products and those who use and dispose of them. For yourselves, the key piece of legislation for today's session is simpler recycling. This has the most direct effect on your properties and your residents. So I'm going to talk through that legislation in a little bit more detail. So basically, simpler recycling is what it sounds like. The idea is to make recycling simpler by making it consistent across all local authorities in England. And for households, that means that from the 1st of April 2026, every household in England should have recycling services in place for dry recycling and food waste. There are a few exceptions around food waste where some local authorities have exemptions in place for transitional arrangements, so it will be a little bit later. But for the majority, the vast majority of local authorities, it is the 1st of April 2026 dry and food waste collection. So for dry recycling, that means glass, metal, plastic bottles, pots, tubs, trays, tubes, paper and card. It also means that where practical, paper and card should be collected separately from other materials. That might not always be possible, and it's up to the local authority in each case to decide whether it is a practical way of collecting. In addition, every household will need a weekly food waste collection. For both of these, households in flats can share bins, so there won't need to be individual bins for households in flats, but there must be bins provided just for those properties specifically. So bring banks in the street for general use are not compliant with simpler recycling. And from April 2027, the dry recycling requirements will be expanded to include plastic film, so plastic bags and wrapping. And just to note that this also already applies to your offices and places of work. Businesses in England were required to have these services in place from April this year, unless you are a micro firm with 10 people or less employed, in which case it's 2027. So you should already have these services in place. And if you haven't, we recommend that you talk to your waste provider if they're not currently being offered to you. Okay, so just a bit of context around waste and recycling to understand why it's so important. I think it's useful to understand what people are throwing away, what happens to it at the moment, and what the opportunities for improvement are. So in London, we have gathered evidence on what people in flats throw away and where they put it. And this picture shows the composition of a typical flat rubbish bin. So what's in a typical flats rubbish bin in London. The green shaded materials here are things that actually could be recycled. So you can see that almost 2/3 of what's in the rubbish bins could be being recycled by another route at the moment. And the biggest single material is food waste. So almost 1/3 of what's in the rubbish bins is food waste. And food waste in rubbish bins, it's a waste of food, it's a waste of money, and it can bring particular problems of smells and vermin where there are open bins, for example. Another third of what's in there is recyclable packaging, paper, card, plastic, etc. So the actual rubbish that should be in there that can't be recycled is really the minority of stuff. And this is the rubbish bins, not the recycling bins. So there's a lot in there that doesn't need to be. So that was the rubbish bins. We've also done some work to look at how much of the total stuff is actually going into the right bins. So we've looked at what proportion of recyclable materials are actually being captured in recycling bins. Again, this is estimates from London data, but it's likely to be similar across England as well. So the bars show the total of dry recycling and food waste, and the green part of each one is how much of that is currently going into the recycling bins, and the grey is how much is going into the rubbish bins. So for the dry recycling on the left, About 37% of the stuff that could go into recycling bins is doing at the moment. So 63% of it is ending up in the rubbish bin. A lot of flats in London do have a dry recycling service in place, but it's not always that well set up. It's not always that well used. So there's clearly a lot of material that could be better captured. And for food waste, it's a more stark picture. And we know that a lot of that is because the food waste services is not necessarily in place at flats at the moment. So the figures do reflect that. But at the moment, we estimate that over 90% of the food waste that's being created in flats is still going into rubbish bins. And we could view this as a negative, but actually it shows the scale of the opportunity to make it better, particularly on food waste. And that's why it's really important that we make services work well for people, because we know that people do want to recycle, and there's a lot of benefit that could be gained from doing so. And finally, just before I hand over to Shelley to talk through the operational stuff in a bit more detail, I think it's just useful to have a reminder of what happens to the things that go in those bins. So if it's packaging, if it's dry recycling and it goes into the recycling bins, it's sent to a materials recovery facility where it's sorted, baled into the different materials and sent back for processing into new items. It preserves raw materials, it saves energy, saves water and carbon emissions. For food waste, if it's collected separately, it is sent to an anaerobic digestion plant or an in-vessel composter, where it is processed by industrial composting into liquid, which is used as fertilizer and energy. It saves the embedded nutrients in food, it saves energy, it saves carbon. And then finally, if the material is not diverted, it goes into rubbish bins. It is sent in London, sent to energy from waste. There is still some landfill in England, but it's decreasing. So the majority of waste is sent to energy from waste plants. And it is burnt, it produces electricity. However, that material is then lost. And burning plastics in particular is a very high carbon activity. So putting things into the rubbish bins, burning it is really the last resort. And that's the aim of the legislation, is to divert waste from it. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Shelley to talk through more directly how this might affect your properties.
Thank you, Liz. So we're going to spend these next few sections on what this practically means for you as housing managers, and what support might be available as well to help implement these changes. So as Liz has just explained, so all properties will need to have a recycling service in place, and some councils might also introduce a separate paper and card bin for you. But it shouldn't affect you too much if you've already got recycling present at your box, basically. What it might mean is that if you have enough recycling bins already, the council might, rather than adding a new paper bin in, just swap out a standard recycling bin for a paper one. So the quantity of your recycling bins might not change. It just might be the type that might change. Everyone, like Liz said, will need to have a food bin in their in their bin area. There are a couple of councils where this might be a bit later, but it's very few. But for most councils in England, this will need to be in place by the 1st of April next year. And from 2027, councils will also need to collect plastic film, as Liz mentioned as well. So things like carrier bags. Some of you might be aware that there has been a huge project lately around how to collect plastic film from households. This report and its findings were only published last week, so we're not entirely sure how this will apply to flats until we understand really the full outcomes of the report. So at the moment, this is more just one to be aware of, but we don't have any specific guidance as of yet. And for those of you on the call whose blocks don't currently have a food service, or maybe you don't have one at home and you're not really familiar with it, this is how a food waste service operates at blocks of flats. So residents provided a small indoor caddy. This is my one. I live in a flat. This is my one at home, so it's really small. And councils might also provide residents with a starter pack of compostable liners to line their bin. It's not always the case. Some councils ask their residents to wrap items in things like paper, for example, but essentially the resident fills up their caddy. They fill it up with food that they don't eat, so like food scrapings, mouldy bread, banana skins, vegetable peelings, things like that. And then in the bin area will be a larger food bin. So as you can see here, there are kind of 3 types of bins generally that might be offered to you. So we have a small bin here, which is very similar actually to the size of your kind of household recycling bin or your household rubbish bin that you might have at your house. Housing unit here in the middle. So this is a metal, usually metal or plastic unit, which a smaller food waste bin goes into. So it really containerizes the food bin. And right on the right here, we have these much smaller food bins as well. These are ones that you typically see at your household level property, but sometimes they might be offered if the bin store isn't quite suitable to house the housing unit. Essentially, one of these types of bins will be provided, and it will be dependent on, your bin store size, but also how many people are at your flats as well, and what can practically be accommodated. And just to note that food waste is collected every week. It's mandated to be collected every week as well. And for some of you who maybe don't yet have, just skipping ahead there, a recycling service at your blocks of flats. Some councils provide these indoor recycling bags, so residents can take stuff down to the bin store, or sometimes residents might be asked to use their own bags or buckets just to store the recycling to take it down. So this is my cat Fluff beautifully demonstrating. I didn't actually stage this photograph. She genuinely came and sat by the recycling, but how this works in practice. And your recycling is then tipped into the recycling bins. Usually councils ask for recycling to be tipped in the recycling bins nice and loose. It means the crews can check there's no incorrect items in it, but it also helps create lots more space as well if the items are nice and loose in the bins and not in plastic bags. Again, some councils might offer these smaller bins, which are the same size as your the bins that you might have outside of your house, or you might be offered these larger bins if there's lots of people in your block. And as Liz said earlier, this might be a separate bin if the councils choose to collect paper and cards separately. But some of you might already have a separate paper and card bin in place anyway, because that is also quite common across England. Now, we'll talk a bit more about this in the next few slides, but actually some of the main benefits arising from this legislation to use housing managers is that all of your properties then, in theory, should receive the same service, collecting the same materials. So this should really make any communications easier for you when you're sending any recycling related information to your tenants and leaseholders. So for example, if you have leaseholder packs which have recycling information in, or if you have tenant packs, and if you do periodic reminders, this should now be able to be managed kind of centrally. So it doesn't matter whether you have flats, if you manage flats in like central London or the West Midlands, everyone should be collecting the same items. And a real advantage as well of having a food service is that it's mandated, as I said earlier, under new legislation to be collected weekly. So as we saw from Liz's slides, loads of the stuff that's put in our rubbish bins is food. This is a really good chunk of waste being taken out of your rubbish bins, which will help to avoid them from overflowing. If I just take off my ReLondon waste officer hat off for a second and talk to you, my resident / leaseholder with my hat on, we had food introduced to our block fairly recently. Our rubbish bins collected fortnightly. We had the standard problem of overflowing, particularly around Christmas, and that's because a lot of the time food didn't have a home to go to. So food was just sat waiting in them for 2 weeks until they were collected. We got leaks, we got smells, we had to pay for extra waste collections. But actually, since having our food waste bins in our small block, we're only a block of 20, we've recycled the equivalent of about 10 black bins worth of food, which is massive. And very, very practically, this means that we rarely now get massively overflowing bins, and we very rarely, if ever, now get like leaking rubbish bins as well. And also this is true for having a dry recycling service in place as well. So not just the food, obviously, that contain, there's a lot of food in the rubbish bins, but about 60% of what's already in the rubbish bins should be able to be recycled as well. If recycling is tipped in nice and loose, it means there's space for people to recycle. So again, actually having this new suite of bins and this legislation is a real opportunity to kind of move stuff from the rubbish bins, which, usually is the cause of them overflowing. So hopefully this should, generally mean cleaner bin stores as well for you. And finally, especially for some of the larger housing associations who are probably on the call, I know a lot of you have climate and kind of carbon strategies or general sustainability strategies as well. So having these services in place, meaning more people are recycling, means that you should also be able to help meet any kind of corporate sustainability targets as well, because you can also now say that your blocks are recycling your food, they're recycling more, and we're diverting more recycling and food from the rubbish bins, and all of those associated environmental and carbon benefits. And as Liz said earlier, there are kind of a huge suite of legislative reforms coming in around waste that have kind of hit all at the same time, essentially. And these aren't likely to impact you directly, but they're worth just being aware of, essentially. So at the moment, we are in the consultation phase for the emissions trading scheme, but essentially in a few years' time, councils will very likely need to pay a lot more for sending rubbish, which contains plastic, so plastic bottles, textiles, etc., to energy from waste facilities where most of the waste in the UK is sent. What this might mean for you is that if you pay for any rubbish collections or you have to pay for recycling bins which are contaminated and they have to be emptied as rubbish, for example, then this could potentially increase the cost of getting these emptied. What I do want to stress here is this is potentially, because we don't know what these costs will be yet. We're still in the consultation phase, but this is just a flag. What you might have also seen in the news is that there is a deposit return scheme coming to the UK as well. So all 4 nations will have this in a few years' time. And this is where there will be collection points available across the UK at supermarkets, at shops, for everyone to take back their drinking bottles and cans back to. And when you take it back to one of these points, you'll get a deposit back, so, 1, 5, 10p, etc. That'll still be decided. You might have seen this in the news recently with Ireland. So their scheme has now been going for about a year, and they have seen 980 million plastic drinks bottles, so basically bottled water, bottles of pop, and cans returned, which is amazing. What this means for you is that if your residents choose to take these items back to a store or point rather than putting them in the recycling bins or the rubbish bins, you might notice that the amount of bottles and cans in your bins goes down. So this might help to kind of keep the volume down in your recycling and rubbish bins. And on this point as well, the way that waste is being paid for has changed. So as of very recently, producers of packaging, so your big companies who produce items in any type of packaging, so crisp packets, cardboard boxes, glass jars, essentially most things that we all have in our household, they now pay into a pot which is distributed to councils to help them collect all that waste that ends up in a bin. Essentially, the more recyclable the item is, the less of a fee the producers need to pay. And the intention is that this will increase the amount of packaging that can be recycled and is recyclable. So hopefully, again, this means less being put into your rubbish bins. And finally, in place is what we call POPs. Essentially, this is because things like sofas now have to be sent legally to energy from waste facilities because they have been found to contain harmful forever chemicals. So what you might have noticed or might notice is that if you have any fly tips or you need to dispose of things like sofas and chairs, quotes might increase because they also potentially contain plastics, which might increase under the ETS costs as well. So again, no major impacts for you, but it's just ones to be aware of. So before we kind of move on, what we're really interested in actually is to understand what your main challenges are in your bin areas at your blocks. So my colleague Casey, who's on the call, is just going to pop a link into the chat for this, but there's also a QR code you can scan as well. So we're really interested to understand what challenges you face at your blocks of flats. Just so all these responses are anonymous, by the way, so don't be shy. We won't know who they've come from, but it'd be really interesting to understand. I'll just quickly move on because I think we've had lots and lots of responses from this already, which is fantastic. As Liz said, at the start, ReLondon, we are very London focused, but we do also help other local authorities outside of London as well. Our remit is to help London transition to a low carbon circular economy. But one of our main areas of focus is and has been how to help residents who live in a flat recycle. So people who live in purpose-built flats, HMOs, flats with shops. A lot of this research has been focused on understanding how to help some of the challenges that you have all entered into poll, such as stuff being left in the bin areas, and the communications not always reaching people because your flats are tenanted. Well, they're kind of like the two main ones that are coming up at the moment. So although for councils, food waste is a new collection stream, one of our last major projects in conjunction with the Peabody Housing Trust, who are one of the largest social landlords in the UK, was essentially to understand how best to implement these simpler recycling changes that we've spoken about today. So how to implement food and understand what makes the whole system work. So maximising success for you, for the residents, as well as the council crews as well. So we actually did a video with residents, which I always found really interesting to understand what works for them, what doesn't work for them. This research included putting cameras in people's kitchens, so their behaviour was captured in real time. So this is a very short video about the challenges and experiences of people living in the flat, told by the residents themselves, that helped produce some of the output.
We have no space at all in my kitchen for recycling.
If I was to get a recycling bin, I don't know where it would go.
Our journey from the kitchen to the bins can sometimes be slightly tricky, but that's what you have two grown-up children for, to help with. It makes you not want to touch them. If the bins are dirty and not kept clean.
As much as it's a place for recycling, it's also a place where people want to go to the toilet.
This, I don't know if it belongs there, but it is there. I hope it gets recycled. That's why I did it.
I think what I'm learning from this is the environment really drives what I care about.
But essentially what this video shows is that, and what we found was that recycling needs to be easy. People need to have knowledge of what to do, and they need to be motivated on how to do it. So, and this is exactly what the residents told us, and from their video interviews as well. So making sure that when we have new bins, they're located for people, so not just caretakers or the collection crews, having install home options, so things like the food waste bins or the recycling bags, so residents actually have the facilities to transport their waste to the recycling bins and the recycling area. They're prepared, they've got stuff in their home, so they have everything they need to hand. They also need to know what to do. So this sounds really, really obvious, but having clear, visible signage on all the bins, in the bin stores, as well as notice boards. In the pilots, we had floor vinyls, which literally directed people to where their new bins were. We also have annual comms, and there might also be the opportunity to insert communications into like tenant and leaseholder packs. When I bought my flat, I had a leaseholder pack, which also had an explanation about waste and recycling, which was really helpful. So it's really about taking away any potential confusion. And lastly, residents need to be motivated to recycle. So it's really, really important actually that bin rooms are clean, they're well lit, and they're inviting to use spaces. If a bin store is really dark and inviting, these are not behaviours, or they're not spaces that people want to spend a long time in to sort their waste out. They just want to kind of get in and get out of there essentially. So all of the research that we did was with Peabody over the past few years, resulted in what we call this flats recycling package. So this is a set of guidelines, communication templates to help councils, housing managers to not only implement the simpler recycling reforms, but really how to make it effective and to work for as many people as possible. So this is what it kind of looks like. I suspect that many of the top images are probably very familiar to you. So you can see a lack of signage, overflowing bins, and a generally poor bin room layout. And after the FRP was implemented, so essentially simpler recycling, made real clear use of the signage. You can see at the bottom, there's a food waste housing unit and signposting on the floor where the bin should go. So it's really nice, neat and clear. And just thinking about this from a resident's point of view, that it's made nice and easy for them. I know in some areas, there are still refuse chutes available. These were closed for our project, and I know Metro Store have recently had a few webinars as well around closing refuse chute closures, not least from a fire safety point of view, but also from a hygiene perspective and a recycling participation perspective as well. I think my colleague Casey is going to insert those 2 links as well, if that's something that you would need to consider. Almost finally from me, we've also talked a lot about the changes that will be happening, about the best practice and how to implement it. But here are some things that councils might be doing to also help you implement these changes at your block. So we've got people from all over the UK joining us today. So obviously we can't speak for all 360 odd councils, but generally speaking, councils might offer you new bin stickers to relabel bins. Most councils will probably do a lot of communications in the run up to any changes. This might include leaflets. They might also offer bin stall signage as well, notice board posters, as we've seen in previous slides. Some boroughs, mostly the ones in London that I'm aware of, on their websites already have a landlords or managing agents page that already has signage, letter templates, bin stall signage to download. So again, if signage is lacking in your bin areas, then it might be worth checking out on your council's website if they already have downloadable assets. For containers, so both for recycling and food waste, some councils might provide new containers. Some London boroughs have just completed actually big projects helping upgrade bins at some large blocks. And some of our London boroughs provide a kind of tiered support as well. So depending on the block size or need, they might provide a refurbishment of bins on a first come first served basis. And for food waste, we'd expect that all councils give out the indoor food caddies to residents, so the small indoor ones. Some councils, as I said earlier, might provide starter packs of liners for residents. Just be aware that's not the case for all councils. That's very much on a council by council basis, because some advise residents to use different types of liners. And for the housing units, for the food waste bins, you will probably receive 1 of 3 bins, what you saw on the slides earlier. So for the housing units, they are quite expensive in terms of standard bin. So some councils might provide these on a first come, first served basis, or they might provide them depending on the type of bin store you have, for example. And lastly from me, again, these are actually really quite big changes for a lot of councils, and we really want to make sure, as I did everyone, that the success of implementing this new legislation really maximises the benefits for you. This is all about cooperation. So one thing I think that the councils would like from managing agents is help with communicating about these changes to tenants. So if you have like coffee mornings, estate walkabouts, or WhatsApp groups, that would be really fantastic to let residents know kind of what changes are coming. The council will very, very likely, or the councils will very, very likely be sending leaflets, letters, etc. to tenants anyway, but it's always really helpful to have second backup ways of communicating. There's loads of logistics involved in this, obviously, so making sure that the councils and the crews can access properties when they come to deliver things like the indoor food bins. If any of you have got those really big blocks with on-site caretakers or concierges, helping them to deliver items to residents would be absolutely massively appreciated as well. And finally, if boroughs do need access to bin stores, either to undertake the site assessments, so to understand where food bins might fit, for example, they might want to do this jointly with you to make sure that location works for you and your residents, as well as the crews. So making sure that they have your contact details is absolutely crucial, and any keys and codes as well to allow them to complete deliveries. And just making sure that everyone on site kind of knows what's happening when potentially new food bins come onto site as well. So that's it from me. I'm just going to pass you back to Liz now.
Thanks, Shelley. Just to summarise what you've heard this morning. So from April 2026, simpler recycling for households comes into force, and the way that councils collect waste from your blocks might change. All households will need dry recycling and weekly food waste service. Councils can't do this alone. Councils, residents, landlords, managing agents and social housing providers will need to work together to help make the improvements work well. When you are implementing changes, remember the key principles of ease, knowledge and motivation, which Shelley talked through when you're looking at where to put new bins to make the service as successful as it can be. All of those 3 are important together to make things work well for residents. And check with your council about support is available, because as Shelley said, many will provide free bins, signage and information for your tenants. or they may have information ready for you to download from the website. It's worth speaking to them early to find out what is available and how you can work with them. And then if following today you are interested in further support to implement the changes and embed them in resident and staff behaviours, please feel free to reach out to us at ReLondon. We offer bespoke packages of one-to-one support for housing providers as well as for local authorities. And we can offer things such as helping you implement recycling improvements at purpose-built flats and training for staff and stakeholder engagement workshops to encourage buy-in. So drop us a line at any point if you're interested in discussing any of those options. But we do also have comprehensive set free to use resources on our website. Some of the links have already been posted in the chat today by Casey, but all of our flats recycling package reports, toolkits, communications resources are available for you to use free of charge. They give you detailed guidance on making the improvements, and our presentation today has been based on all of these, so do feel free to download those and make use of them. So that is all the slides that we have today. I can see that there are some questions in the chat already, so very happy to try and answer those as we go through.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Shelley. That's excellent presentation and overview. So one of the questions that was asked was relating to the size of the bin rooms, which I take the concern was around potentially additional bins. I know you mentioned in a lot of cases, Shelley, I think that it would be a change to the recycling bins, but not any additional bins. I have heard in some areas that councils are trying to sort of change the collection frequency, which is quite concerning for landlords. Would you just sort of touch on that? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so about changing collection frequency, was that, Nigel?
Yeah, and then therefore requiring a lot more bins. We've got some more questions on here about fire risk, and there's a lot of implications, I think. And I just wondered, as an organisation, whether you had a view on that.
As an organisation, we don't have a view on collection frequency because that is down to every individual borough's collection policy, and there'll be reasons for implementing whatever they have decided locally. What I think is good about simpler recycling is that for food waste, that is going to be a weekly collection, and that is a huge chunk of food being taken out the rubbish bins, potentially every week. But yeah, on it, when local authorities look at flats, without my ReLondon hat on, I was a flats recycling manager, for want of a better word, for a good chunk of my life. And it usually is on a general case-by-case basis rather. There will be some bin stores that were built 50, 60 years ago, like my bin store, for example, that is quite small. So what councils tend to do is try and work with you to find what the most appropriate solution is, right? So I can't fit a housing unit in my bin store at home, but what we can do is fit smaller 23 litre bins in, which the council are happy to collect, for example. We can't fit in big 1100 litre bins, so we've got 360 and 240 litre bins, so we can try and make it work on that respect, basically. But yeah, collection policies are down to each local authority, but for food waste, it will be collected everywhere weekly at least. And like I said, as Liz showed you on that slide, that's a massive chunk potentially coming out of the refuse bins.
Yeah, good, thank you. So if for any landlords that have got concerns over the space that's going to be taken up, or you'd encourage a dialogue with the local authority to find a workable solution. There's also a point about cross-contamination. Would you add any more about the use of slotted lids, enclosures, various things which make it harder for contamination to occur?
Yes. I mean, the photos that Shelley shared from our research projects, we used reverse lid bins for the recycling with recycling apertures, so that you limit the ability of people to put in black bags, basically, and that can cut down contamination significantly. Housing units as well with the apertures can also do the same for recycling as well. So contamination is, it is an issue. Recognise that. What we found from our projects was that as well as increasing the recycling, the contamination also decreased. And a lot of that, I think, is around the communication aspect as well. So making it really clear for people what goes in each bin, in the information that they receive, but also actually in the bin stores, the signage as well. So making it clear which bin is which, and making sure that they're put back in the right places as well. So yeah, we do recommend using kind of the infrastructure to limit the ability for people to put in bags of black bag rubbish as well.
Yeah, if it avoids missed collections and all the repercussions from that, then that has to be a good thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, I was going to ask a question. I know it's been asked and answered to some extent, about a recommended sort of volume. People, particularly the food waste, how much people should allow. I think you said 10 litres per household per week, something like that. Is that like a starting volume? Is there a more aspirational sort of target, or any additional thoughts around that?
That is based on sort of two caddies per week per household, really. So that's a 5 litre caddy, 10 litres per household per week, and that in our trials was sufficient. I think with food waste, it's very heavy as well. So if you've got kind of that much capacity for a bin, you might need more than one bin to kind of to put that in. See what I mean? But I think with food waste for flats, it's sort of starting out with that, and then if you need more, you can add more. So in Shelley's block, for example, you could add another 23 litre bin, I'm assuming, Shelley, if you needed to. But 10 litres in our projects, that was sufficient for the amount of food waste that was collected. For houses, it's usually a 23 litre outside bin for each household. And the capture from flats does tend to be a bit lower. So 10 litres per household, what we found was okay. But yeah, aspirationally, you could end up with more than that. I don't know if Shelley wants to add anything.
No, I think that's right. And I think for this was all based on data captured as well for the flats project. So for both of them, there's some really comprehensive waste monitoring going on to understand how much is being diverted, how much is being captured, what that worked out to kilos per household. And we use that for our flats, but also things like our flats for shops work as well. And it works out sufficient for what's required.
Yeah, it's good. I think from my experience, you've got to make a start, haven't you? And I think there's always that potential to scale up and add more. But the other side of that is it possible that we could actually still be wasting too much edible food? And overall, we should actually be trying to reduce the overall amount of wastage, shouldn't we? So let's not forget that.
Yeah. Absolutely. The vast majority of the food waste that is in bins is edible. That's about 2/3 at least of the food waste that's been thrown away is stuff that could have been eaten. It's not just peelings and apple cores. And there is some evidence anecdotally that when people start recycling their food waste and separating it out, they come to a bit of a realization about how much food they're wasting and actually reduce that amount of food waste. And that was another finding of our second project, that the amount of food waste overall did go down. So the amount that households were wasting. So it has additional benefits to just capturing that food for anaerobic digestion. It has potentially the additional benefit of reducing the amount of food waste overall, which is the ultimate aim, really. Better for it not to be there, whichever bin it's going in.
100%. Yeah, there's quite a bit of evidence now to support that, I think. So there's a great question around behaviour change in challenging housing stock like HMOs, large flats, contamination, that sort of thing, which I thought just to refer back to for a moment. There's some great work being done by ReLondon on this, some of which you've shared. Maybe we could put some links to some other pieces of work you've done, as we have indeed at Metro as well. Behaviour change is a massive thing in flats and HMOs. So there's quite a bit of reference material and something which we'll be coming back to again, I've no doubt. But yeah, did either of you want to say any more on that?
Yeah, I think, as you said, this has been our like bread and butter for the past, I don't know, decade or something like that, working in flats and understanding the behaviours of people in flats, what motivates them to recycle, what we can do to improve that. So this is kind of a tried and tested template. But what also I think the webinars on your website, Nigel, is that Fife Council obviously rolled out food waste to their high-rise blocks of flats. Was it last year sometime? And they presented the results of their findings as well. They actually based a lot of their communications on the ReLondon templates, actually, but they also did similar things, understanding what motivates people to recycle their food, challenges. They had really high-rise blocks, as from what I can remember as well. So how it worked for them. So I definitely recommend looking at that webinar or having a look on their website if they've got a published report on that, because that's a really good resource as well. And it kind of validates a lot of the findings that we find at flats and what works. But again, I think for all of the work we do at ReLondon, particularly when it comes to around behaviour change and people living in flats, HMOs, flats with shops, it's about those three key findings of ease, knowledge, and motivation. And all of those are kind of interoperable. So the triangle each of those things needs to happen in order for recycling, either food or dry recycling, to work right. So people need to be motivated, so they don't want to go into bin stores that are got leaks everywhere and there's no lighting, for example. They need to know what to do, so what information is available to them. If you get new tenants, have you got a leaseholder pack, for example, that explains the changes? Is it super obvious what's going on in the bin store? Because I can say from when I first moved into my block of flats, it absolutely was not clear at all what was happening. And ease, it's got to be easy for people to do the stuff that you want them to do, right? So making sure there's no blockers for them to be able to participate in the behaviour that you're expecting them to participate in. And I think keeping and feeding to those core tenants, regardless of what materials you're introducing, they're the three things to really maximise success.
Yep, excellent. There was an important point on fire risk and insurance and bins being stored within 6 metres of the building. And this, I think, goes back many years, really, insofar as even now, before these changes, we've got more bins, recycling bins externally, that there's not room for them in the bin stores and that sort of thing. What would your recommendations be around that?
When we're looking at on a case-by-case basis, we reference the European guidance on fire risk, which is the 6 metre, 5 metre rule. And I think the reality is, in London especially, there's often not space to have the bins that distance from the building. So we are aware of those risks, and that's where things like housing units to reduce the fire risk and increase the kind of the time that a bin will potentially burn is really important. And bins underneath balconies, those kind of issues, it is really important to be aware of that. It's always a case of kind of balancing the reality with the guidance, but that is where things like the housing units come into play, where the placement by access routes, etc. I mean, I know that's something that you've done a lot of work on as well, Nigel, so I don't know if it's something that you wanted to comment on yourself as well.
No, that's helpful, thank you. Our recommendation would be that make sure it's included within your fire risk assessment, and a professional analysis can be made of those risks and a way found to reduce and mitigate that. There's also a question: what happens if a housing provider refuses to introduce the food waste? What's the recourse that you would expect local authorities to take there?
I think there are powers that local authorities do potentially have, because this is a legislative requirement that councils have to provide this service to all households. Certainly for England, for simpler recycling. So there's no exemptions for councils for this. There's no getting around it. It has to be done. There are powers within local authority to have bins put in place, but this is like, I would say, absolutely last mega step. I don't think anyone would want to go down this route. They'd really want to work. It's in everyone's interest to work in cooperation to try and introduce these changes. Basically, it's of no benefit to anyone to kind of do these fines or enforcement type actions. So what I would say, the outcome of today and our kind of request would be for everyone to work together and kind of see what is possible for your block. Councils will try and be, very likely will try and be as flexible as they practically can be, within the parameters and challenges that we all know are at local blocks, for example. But yeah, I think cooperation is absolutely key here, and working together to make these happen.
Yep, that's good. So there's a point. There's been several points about like a nationally sort of coordinated campaign around food waste and recycling, reducing contamination. I mean, I have to say, I think ReLondon is a standout example of that. But do you think that will be promoted more at sort of national level?
I hope so. I know that will be down to DEFRA, who are progressing with the plans for simpler recycling and extended responsibility communications. I don't know the detail of that or when that campaign will come out. I would hope that there will be, because I think it's a really key message, and if it can be put out nationally, then that's going to help everybody, local authorities and the managing agency, if everyone is aware of it through all of those channels. And that's kind of the aim of simpler recycling. So yeah, I think watch this space. I don't know any detail, but hopeful that will happen.
Yeah, that's good. We've mentioned flexible plastics, but any thoughts on other sort of problem materials, I was going to say, such as lithium-ion batteries? Would you support, collections at block level of things like that?
I think, material dependent, materials focused. The organisation does a lot of work on campaigns around diverting batteries and reducing battery fire risk in vehicles, for example. Some local authorities do collect textiles, small appliances and batteries from households and communal properties. It's not as widespread as food or dry recycling, for example, but some of them do offer those additional waste collections as well. And to be honest, once simple recycling kicks in, once the film and flexibles kick in, there's usually a place to take small appliances, there's usually a place to take batteries, there's usually a place to take textiles locally, if that's not collected direct from the bin store. So there's not a lot else left in the bin apart from sanitary products, nappies, bit of polystyrene potentially. I can't really think of. I'm struggling to think of what else would be left in the black or the rubbish bin that would need to be collected. But the reforms aim to collect as much recycling, and the extended producer responsibility aims to make as much packaging as recyclable as practical as well.
Good, thank you. So there's a question whether you've done any research at ReLondon in relation to high-rise flats with chutes. You mentioned about the chutes being closed with your project. Have you done any more work around that?
We haven't done anything recently specifically on high rise. It's something that we are keen to do more work on, but we haven't got another project ongoing at the moment on that. I think there are examples from other local authorities in Scotland and in the West Midlands of authorities looking at high rise flats. And in some cases, chutes were closed. In some cases, they were not, but recycling facilities were added outside. So there are some examples around. I think Casey has just put some information in the chat as well around there is some interesting work going on in London, not through us, but through other local authorities with chutes that divert waste into different bins with key card systems. So there are some interesting things happening. Not that we are involved directly, but there are some interesting things around it, and we can maybe share some information about that afterwards.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. And yeah, likewise, at Metrodol, we've shared quite a few examples of that, and we'll continue to do so, work with and around chutes. There's a few questions, what's there about multilingual signage. In my experience, you want to use as much in the way of colours and symbols and that sort of thing as possible. Would you agree with that?
Yes, generally, I think visual representations are better, and again, if they're sort of standard across local authorities and across England, then that helps people recognise wherever they are that they've got the same services. There may be very local situations where translations of information is required, and that, you know, that's something that we would look at on a very specific case by case basis. Generally, I think pictorial information, visual stuff that, you know, whether it's whatever language it's in, if you can convey it through pictures, diagrams, etc., keeping the words to a minimum, because we know that people don't want to read lots and lots of information about bins and recycling. So keeping it simple is always good. But yeah, in a very local situation, there may be situations where you know, communities will need some additional support and some translating materials, but that would be, yeah, on a local basis.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So I think there's a few more questions there, most of which you're actually answering as you go along. So thank you for that. Oh, Amy is keeping Amy busy there. Well done, everybody. So just before we wrap up, does anybody want to pose an open question? Put your hand up, and the floor will be yours. Karen, yes, please.
Hi, Nigel. Thank you. It's not a question. It's more a plea to all the managing agents and landlords on this. I can see Liz knows what I'm going to say. It's more of a plea to the managing agents and landlords on this call. Please don't assume that your local authority knows who manages your block and who to contact. So please do contact your local authority and let them know who the correct contact details and company details of the managing agents for each block, because in many cases local authorities simply don't know, and in a bid to work together we do need to know who to contact. I'm talking from a local authority perspective. So that's it, not a question, more of a plea. Please do contact your local authority to let us know who manages each block. Thank you.
No, thank you, Karen. That's really important, and I'm glad you've come forward with that. And at Metrodol, we're more than happy to facilitate, because mostly we actually know both parties. We were considering sort of arranging almost like regional meetings, so people can actually sort of get together and have that conversation. So, Kevin.
Hiya, thank you for taking my question. We've done a lot of educational work with our customers about bin stores and overloading, and there was one the other day where I went through the bins with the guy from the council, and about 70% of it was recycling put into the general waste. So the general waste is overflowing. We've knocked on people's doors, we've given them extra bins, we've written to them, we spoke to them all individually, and we still can't change the behaviour. Is there any tips to further underline to try and get them to at least act on what we're telling them? It's causing quite a few problems across our geography.
That's a great question, Kevin. Liz, do you want to expand on? I mean, it's good practice all the way through, isn't it? Really, from starting a process within the kitchen, within the flat, and then following it through. How can we remove obstacles? It may even become almost like a tenancy conversation that's got to be had. But no, you go, Liz.
Yeah, I mean, you know, thanks for the question, Kevin. And it sounds like you're already doing lots of the things that we would recommend in terms of engaging residents and providing extra bins. I think making sure that the infrastructure in the home is there as well could be something to look at if it's not already. So
yeah, we've actually done that. We put new we put new bin stores in. We're also working with Metro Store to do a couple of blocks. So they're all flash, all nice and prim and proper, and the bins fit in there, and it's all jet washed. And I'd be proud of a bin store like it, but we just can't seem to get people to put the plastics in the plastic bin. It all goes in the general waste along with food, clothing, electrical items, gas bottles, where they're, it's just a thing we can't seem to break. We could recharge. That doesn't work because a lot of people on benefits don't pay a service charge. So for them, there's no implications. When you recharge directly to the customer, it causes all kinds of issues with ombudsman and recharge policies. So it seems like we're quite toothless in order to change behaviour. So I'm not looking for a silver bullet.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for, but has anybody else had this similar experience, and what have they done to overcome it? Because it's costing a fortune, like hundreds of thousands of pounds in bin store clearances at the moment. So no matter what we do, it doesn't seem to cut through.
Yeah, that I sympathise, and I would imagine that you're not the only person that is having that experience. I mean, when I mentioned infrastructure, there's also the kind of what people have in their homes. And again, it's by no means a silver bullet, but something that we did in one of our projects was give people reusable recycling bags or bins for them to separate the stuff out in their home, because obviously if they're not doing it in the house and in their flat, they're not going to take it down to bin and then separate it. That behaviour has to start within the home. So if they have infrastructure provided to them for their kitchen that says put it in here and then take it down, it's just one more nudge towards that correct behaviour. I don't know if Shelley's got anything else to add.
No, obviously it's very difficult to know the specifics of the site, and it sounds like Liz said you're obviously doing amazing things already if you're working with your council and Metro Store as well to kind of get everything nice and shiny and new. I think as well, I mean, I don't know if your council's done it, but kind of any resident engagements, if you have coffee mornings or estate walkabouts, sometimes, it's hearing it, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, of what are the actual barriers. And that's a lot what the flat recycling package and the work at ReLondon has been, is literally interviewing residents, and interviewing them in a way that isn't just knocking at the bins, knocking on the doors and saying, why aren't you recycling? It's like real sit down, in depth, understanding their behaviours, why they do things. One of the really interesting things that we found in the flat recycling package too was that behaviour can also be influenced by lifestyle patterns. So if someone was coming home from work late, I think they were less likely to recycle because they were frazzled from work, but in the mornings they were separating out their tea bags, they were putting paper in the recycling bin. So there might be things around factors like that which might influence your communication with your residents as well, or there might be something in that to understand what would make it more easy for them as well. Just to know, I will have to go soon, by the way.
Thank you for the answers.
Yeah, thanks all. Linda, do you want to come in before we finish?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on the kind of the DEFRA angle and the opportunity to bring the simpler recycling and the food waste as a broader campaign, and getting the right kind of funding to support that. So I think what's changed from like big mainstream communication campaigns from, let's say, 20 years ago when we were introducing multi-curbside collections across the whole of the UK, is that now we've got better digital contacts with all of our managing agents and housing providers, and they already have very strong communication arms inside of the way in which they manage and work with their tenants and residents. And it would be really good to see some sort of funding package going out to local authorities to allow them to create a digital kind of shareable toolbox of information, which then can be cascaded and shared with housing providers and managing agents to be able to make sure they can redistribute the right information to the householder so that everybody is on the same page. Because I think there is a huge lack of understanding, and there's a lot of confusion by the public in relation to what recycling, what bin, what's happening now, what's changing. And I think we really need to drive this forward with something bigger in terms of communications, and it needs to be cascaded so that it can be shared at the right levels across the whole of the UK. So really good to see, you know, that commitment coming forward for everybody to make this work, because we know if we look back at all of the past reports and studies on food waste, the yuck factor, it's really difficult to keep people engaged in food. And there's a lot of churn in housing, and we need consistency in that communications outwardly to really make this stick and make it work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agree, Linda. I think
that's a great idea, Linda. I mean, we that's something that we can take back and try and feed into DEFRA when we have discussions with them.
Brilliant.
Like I said, I don't know if that's something that they're planning, but I think that would be a great idea.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Liz, Shelley. Really appreciate all you've brought to this event. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining.